right, it is 10 o'clock, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. And if other people join us, they can just jump in as they log on. But I wanted to start by thanking everybody for joining us today as we're talking about rocking and rolling our way into this next school year. I'm Jackie Johns, and I'm a member of the Crisis Committee for OSPA. I'm also the president-elect. So again, thank you all for being here. We're really excited about having such a good turnout for today's session. Just to introduce a little bit of what we're going to be doing today, it's going to be a little different. The format's a little different than the sessions that we've done in the past. Today we gathered a bunch of questions from all of you, from psychs across the state and educators on what we can expect, questions that they have about starting back into school here in the fall. So we're going to go through all of those questions. We have a list of those compiled, and we're going to go through them one by one, discuss them. Thank you to those of you that did send in questions. If you didn't send in a question, or maybe you didn't think of it until now, or if you think about it midway through the meeting, go ahead and just put that question in the chat box, because we will have somebody that's monitoring that. And so we'll try to address all of those questions that we have. The biggest change today is that instead of having presenters that are maybe sharing slides with us and things like that, we really want today's session to be very collaborative. We want to learn from each other. We really hope that everybody speaks up, gives us your thoughts as far as maybe what you are doing in your school or you're planning to do in your place of employment. Maybe if you have questions about some different options you're thinking about. Maybe you just have a question of, is this something that people think is a good idea or not? Please be vocal today. Speak up, ask your questions, share your feedback, share your thoughts, because we really want to spend this time today learning from each other, really working together, collaborating, and then seeing if we can figure out some answers for this difficult transition that we're going to be making, and at least answers for today. We all know that things may change as we go along. So again, we're excited to have everybody here today. I see some of you are already putting your information in the chat box, so I love that. Please go ahead and do that so that we know who all is here today. Just go ahead and chat in there your name and where you're from. I'm going to go ahead and get started with having the other members of the Crisis Committee introduce themselves. Again, as I said, my name is Jackie Johns. In addition to my OSPA responsibilities, I am a school psychologist and district mental health coordinator and district special services coordinator for Collinsville Public Schools. So go ahead, Catherine, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I am on the communications committee of OSPA, and then I'm also currently working at the OU Health Science Center.
Great. Trisha?
Hi, everyone. I'm Trisha Goga. I am the treasurer-elect for OSPA, and I work at the Oklahoma State Department of Education as one of their crisis team school psychologists.
Thank you, Trisha. How about Sarah?
Hey, everyone. I am Sarah Rich. I am past president of OSPA, work committee chair of the MTSS reading committee, and obviously here on the crisis committee, and I work for OSU Center for Health Sciences. And as you can see, we're rocking out today is kind of the theme. So we're gonna rock out as we talk about this PPE. So we're so glad you're all here today.
Thank you, Sarah. And I know you can't really tell, I am also rocking out, maybe not as much as some of my colleagues, but I do have my Austin City Limits shirt on here. So I promise I was doing my best to rock out. All the awesome bands are listed on the back, so I can maybe spend part of the time, I'll turn around so people can be entertained by that. And then last, we're gonna have Erica introduce herself, or maybe Joan Jett. I'm not sure what her name is today.
Good morning, everybody. I am channeling my inner Joan Jett this morning. Don't give this girl a theme that comes from the 80s and expect that I will play along, and how lovely that it's recorded for all infamy. That being said, I'm Erica Ollinger. On the OSPA board, I serve as the NASP delegate and as chair for this crisis response committee. And I'm going to be just kind of moderating and starting the conversation today around some of the questions that have been submitted. Oh, and I should mention I'm a crisis team school psychologist at OSDE currently. And as Jackie mentioned, we want this to be a safe space for people to talk about their ideas, to share their questions, to share all of the innovative thinking that you've been involved in. And I remember often in graduate school, people would say things like, there's no stupid questions. And I would also just like to encourage that there's no stupid answers at this point. And so we really do want it to be a safe space for people to discuss, ask questions, and give feedback as we move along. So what I'm going to do is just pose each of the questions that was submitted. I believe we have nine that were submitted. Open it up to either someone who's prepared a little bit of something to share, or just open it up to the floor. And Trisha is going to be posting those questions and any links that we're talking about or any resources in the chat box. So keep your eye on the chat for those questions, and we'll have a space for you to either speak up where you can unmute and join the conversation, or if you're more comfortable, participate in the chat and just type in your thoughts. And then the third option is if you have a question or a comment, but you would like to remain anonymous, you can send those privately, probably to either Sarah or Trisha. So just find Sarah or Trisha in the chat and send those privately, and then they can bring those questions up and you can remain anonymous. So we'll get through these first 9 and any discussion therein. And I hope we also do have time at the end in case there are lingering questions or discussion points that we can get to before 11:30. So just to get started, the first question, and again, Trisha's going to put this in the box so you can see it. How are school psychologists balancing safety with PPE recommendations? And how are we balancing those with validity considerations? And so I'm going to let Sarah share a little bit because she's had the opportunity to conduct some assessments, and then we'll open the floor after she shares with us.
All right, thanks, Erica. So yeah, I have been working all summer long with my physician at OSU Center for Health Sciences in our outpatient clinic. And so I have actually been doing assessments throughout this. We took a little bit of break in May to kind of figure out what to do. And then we've been going back full force all of July. So I don't know that I have the perfect answer, but I'll tell you guys kind of how it's been going for me from an assessment standpoint and some of the decision points that we've been making and changes. And then I believe Catherine also has some experience that she's been doing this summer as well, and is going to share some more information as we go through the questions on that. So obviously kind of first important thing for us was what kind of physical protection measures are we putting in place in the PPE, and then looking at how is that changing our testing, and how do we keep the most valid assessments with also protecting ourselves. And so I think everyone's probably in that same question and same decision point right now. I will share with you, I made just a little document that I think Trisha is going to put a link to, and I'll share my screen of all the things that we're doing. Again, this doesn't mean that it's all the right things and that this is definitely, if you do this, it's going to protect you. This is just what we've come up with. But I'm really interested to hear from you all about what you think about this and other changes or considerations that maybe I have not thought about. Like, we're all in this and there's no stupid answer or question in this. So let me open up and share my screen. So I took some pictures of myself using my PPE the last week and what I use. So the very first thing is mask. And I think the science and literature that they've done in this limited capacity has shown pretty much masks are what you need to do. So I actually have 3 different masks that I alternate throughout the day. When I'm just walking around my office, around colleagues, I'm using just the standard kind of rectangle surgical mask. My homemade mask is really hot. So I use the little rectangular mask because it's a little more comfortable. When I'm doing testing, I'm using the N95 mask. I had started with just the rectangular mask, but and trying to keep the other mask on the child, and I didn't feel as protected as I really
what made me comfortable. And so I did move to an N95 mask just to help add that extra layer of my own personal protection as well as protection for the examinee. There have been a few situations where I have had to take my mask that covers my face off and put on a face shield, which you can kind of see in this picture here. Because either the person had hearing difficulties and they needed to see my mouth, or I felt like there was, they were having trouble focusing on like the sound discriminations and some of the tests from like the WJ oral language and attention test. So that's a consideration, but also a lot of assessments that we give like from the WJ are pre-recorded, so people aren't seeing lips with that. So it's hard to tell how much that changes validity with those. And then we do have all of our examinees wearing either a cloth mask or a medical mask, and that has been really interesting. So I can tell a huge difference between if a child comes in with a mask that they already have from home, and usually those children have been wearing that mask and they understand the importance of it and they do pretty well keeping it on. Kids that come in without a mask and we have to provide them one, they have harder time. I don't know that it has been a prioritized thing at home. So varying degrees of how much they're keeping their mask on. I know some people are saying there's no way a kid's going to keep it on, and I've seen very young children as young as 5 keep a mask on throughout assessments and not have any difficulties at all. And even a child that I'm testing for ADHD, very impulsive, but they know that that mask should be there. And it is telling me my internet's unstable, so please someone let me know if I cut out here. And then other, like I said, have it. Go ahead. Oh,
Sarah, this is Erica, and you are buffering just a little bit.
okay.
I don't know if you have a hotspot or something you can switch to really quick. It's not terrible.
Sorry about
You
that.
are lagging.
Morning.
Okay, and I'm actually on my hotspot, so we'll see what happens. I'm going to, hold on just 1 second.
Okay, let's give Sarah just another couple of seconds. I think she might be trying to secure a little bit better bandwidth. And if we don't hear from her in a couple of seconds, I think Catherine has some things that she can share for us. And thank you guys, as always, for your patience with technology as we're all navigating this space. And she's gone. Okay, Gary Duhon, just so you know, it tells me you're the host, just for your information. So Sarah got kicked off and it says Gary Duhon is the host now. But Catherine, are you where you can share some of the things you have prepared?
Not yet.
Yes, I am. So I have spoken a little bit in some of our past conversations about assessment validity considerations, which is really related to kind of some of these adaptations that we have all been considering. And those of us who've been testing during the summer have been kind of implementing and testing out, like Sarah was discussing. I've had similar experience so far with masks and kids wearing masks. I've been with quite a bit younger kids, so kind of in the 2 to 5 age range. And there is a little bit more difficulty there. A majority of the ones I've been working with have suspected autism concerns typically, but most of the time they're wearing their masks as well. I think that was a good observation that Sarah had, that the ones who bring their own masks maybe are more likely because they've been having more practice and have more exposure to kind of just that experience. whereas the ones that are provided may require more and kind of during assessment reinforcement. And so I put together just some of the considerations I've mentioned previously, together with some sentence starters that I've been kind of working off of in my reports. So kind of the next step in kind of considering how these different variations from standardized administration procedures, how those impact the results of our testing. And it kind of varies depending on what modifications are being made and to what extent. I see that Sarah's back, so I don't know if we want to jump back to where we were at with Sarah, or if you want me to go ahead and share out the sentence starters yet.
Yeah, so I'll just kind of summarize because I don't know what's happening. My hotspot and my regular internet are not working, so yay. So the I guess really, like, I think I jumped in and heard Catherine kind of echoing what I was saying with the mask. The other things that I considered and looking at, I'm not wearing gloves throughout the whole assessment, but when I'm doing anything with shared materials like block design, I am wearing gloves just for that. So I don't have to necessarily worry about immediate transmission there. And a couple other things to consider, like the distance. I know 6 feet is impossible to do and do an assessment, but the more recent research that's coming out of the medical field is showing that 3 feet may be as good as 6 feet. And so I think it is reasonable to keep a 3 feet distance between you and the person, except for when you have a little impulsive kid that gets right in your face and moves around. So, but we always deal with that kind of stuff with testing. And so just those good behavior management strategies that we always use of reinforcing, I think someone said in the chat before I got kicked off, like reinforcing mask wearing, reinforcing staying in your seat. I've even considered like marking a square on the floor of like, do not leave this square or stay in this square to state it more positively. The other piece, and I don't know, Catherine, what you guys are doing or anyone else who's done assessments, is the cleaning and disinfecting afterwards. Because I work for a medical setting, I have access to medical grade disinfectant, which is really nice. And there are these cabbie wipes that we wipe down, and you have to wear gloves when you use them because they're so strong, but they're just like really high powerful Clorox wipes that I wipe everything down, leave it set out for at least an hour before I put it back up to let it dry off, and then trying to not use the same materials in more than once a day. So giving at least a day for or 24 hours for everything to kind of dry and those materials to go off. And CDC, it still says that touch transmission is possible, but it's not as likely as the droplet transmission. So I'm concerned about that in the immediacy, but that's not like my biggest concern. My biggest concern is the distance and the masking. Other precautions, like we're making sure that everyone's temperature is taken before we start. We are making sure that materials, that we're only using materials that have surfaces that can be cleaned. And I think we'll talk about more specifically like the ADOS and another question and how some adaptations that are coming with that. We are making sure that we keep our cleaning supplies in an easily accessible place so that everyone that needs to use it can get it easily without having to like open a cabinet to then get out your cleaning supplies. So little things like that just reduce the touch surfaces and make it kind of easier there. I saw a chat question. I don't have all my chats, so there might be some more, but about the N95 mask and reuse. I've seen and heard that you can reuse them with proper cleaning and disinfecting, and there are several different internet, you can Google that, of different ways to do it. One of them is spraying hydrogen peroxide solution on it and letting it set out. There are some different ones of like putting it in like a low degree oven, or like all kinds of different ways to do it. The main thing that I'm hearing from medical professionals that is for this surgical mask is, as long as it's not soiled, you can use them more than one day. I'm using mine about 2 days. And that's not wearing it all day long. That's just wearing it when I'm face to face with people. And then the N95s, again, just using those cleaning procedures. I've used the hydrogen peroxide spray to clean mine so far, and it's not going to last forever, but it's not necessarily something you have to reuse every time. And the main thing for those is that it still fits pretty tightly over your nose, so that air is not getting around the edges of it.
Sarah, there's one other question before we jump to the next question, or if we are. But Natalie asks, are you testing using Q Interactive or physical stimulus books?
So we don't have Q Interactive, so I'm using the physical stimulus books. We do have some other assessments that my colleague uses, which are on a computer, and so any of those, we're taking precautions to wipe down computer and those pieces. If you were doing Q Interactive, I think you would need to do the same with like the iPads. The iPads with the Q Interactive might actually let you have a little more distance, which could be nice. I mean, those are still made to be in the same room for the validity purposes, but you could do that.
An idea for the paper stimulus, or the traditional stimulus book, is to place a clear sheet over where the students are going to be touching. We also tried one of those pointers. It's like a little fun classroom kind of pointer. That may work for some students. We haven't had a lot of success with it. It's turned more into a distraction or a toy. So we've had more success with the clear sheets on top. I actually ruined a page in a stimulus book, so don't wipe them down with Clorox. Bad idea. It does remove the ink, so clear sheet would be a better alternative there.
Yeah, and I same thing. I haven't tried the clear sheets. That's my next thing. I was trying like one of my unsharpened pencils as a pointer, and you give a kid something they can mess with, they're going to mess with it. So that did not work out as well, as Catherine was saying. I think Trisha put in the link a couple other things. So Pearson has a pretty good summary of considerations with PPE and how they may affect validity. So that kind of addresses this question, and one that we're going to talk about later. And then I saw on social media yesterday a hospital where they call it the button project, and they've taken pictures of the nurses and doctors smiling and put them on there, so that even though they're wearing their mask, the kids can still see their smiling faces. And so I thought that was a cute idea to just again, personalize things a little bit more in this weird time that we're in.
Okay, Sarah and Catherine, thank you for those resources. And I know we could spend a lot of additional time on this question, but just to make sure that we kind of get to some of the other things that have been on folks' minds, let's press forward. And if we can't have time to circle back, we can. But be sure and check out those resources that Sarah's putting in the chat. Also, I will say that you can certainly reach out to Sarah or Catherine, who have been doing this work, and they can give you some more information. Also, I'm seeing awesome ideas from our participants in the chat, and so be watching that. What we will do, this session, by the way, is being recorded, so people can come back later and watch. And we'll also gather those other suggestions and ideas and comments, and we'll try to put together a document to summarize those things to send out as kind of a summary for the meeting. So moving on, and Catherine had started a little bit, the question is, what verbiage should school psychologists be including in their reports to address issues of validity on individual assessments and on overall evaluation results? So Catherine, I think, was going to share some of those.
So I see that Trisha just put a link into a working document that I have that I'm sharing out. And so here I just tried to summarize kind of some of the considerations that I've talked about previously and have had on my mind. I feel like essentially during this time, we're seeing the limitations of our tools and the limitations have always been there. I think they're just being more pronounced now in terms of kind of the errors that can be encountered in the measurements that we use. And so the goal is really just to be documenting the limitations, especially with whatever specific deviations you in particular are using given your individual circumstances. And because there's so much variation in terms of the individual student, kind of what their circumstances are, kind of the variable access they've had to instruction, depending on their unique circumstances, depending on the school's circumstances, the district, there's going to be just so many differences in terms of how that will impact a particular evaluation report and individual evaluation results. And so the goal here, and for me, in terms of the reports that I've been writing up, I've had to kind of adapt what I'm using, whether it's the tools, whether it's the interpretation, based on individual circumstances. So the goal of this document is to provide myself, as well as anyone else who might like to use these sentence starters as ways to acknowledge the limitations of the testing tools, as well as the limitations of our particular circumstances, and document those so that anyone reading the results, reading the scores, they would always have those caveats of how these deviations have impacted interpretation. And of course, just keeping all of those in mind, I think having ourselves document them makes us more aware too of the limitations of the data, and making sure that we're using lots of sources of information, that the conclusions that we're drawing are truly informed by the caution that we're taking. So it's not just putting this as a disclaimer on our results. I mean, of course, that's part of it, to make sure that we're documenting well what we're doing and the decisions we're making, but also truly for ourselves to be taking into consideration how all of the different variables at play right now are impacting the results, and how we can be extra cautious about the conclusions that we're drawing and how we're sharing those with the teams that we work with.
That's such a helpful tool, Catherine, and I hope everyone is able to open those links. Of course, if you're not, let us know, but thank you so much for kind of crusading on that work. I love your use of words, and thank you for sharing those samples. And that kind of takes us into our next question, which I know has been top of mind for many of us, is since we know norms aren't valid because assessments were never normed on a population that's been experiencing a pandemic and missing instruction for as long as students have, how can school psychologists interpret and consider the results? And this is one after Catherine speaks that we're going to open up for some more input on as well.
Yeah, so I don't think there's a really clear answer. I know that some of the recommendations that I've encountered so far are just widening confidence intervals. So making sure that you're taking into consideration kind of the room for error, and just how the different variables impact the normed data. So both at the individual level and at the collective level, COVID has kind of impacted children's baseline academic and behavioral functioning. And so that's something that we have to be taking into account when we're using normed data. So sometimes it may not be appropriate to use the normed data. And so we have to acknowledge those limitations and perhaps rely on other sources of information, or at the very least kind of in conjunction with other sources of information, which I think as school psychologists, we do that regularly. We use a lot of existing data and collect kind of curriculum-based measurement, those kinds of things, which I know depending on circumstances, we're limited in that area as well. But just really using those tools that we are aware of, and making sure that others on our team are aware of. I don't think everyone on our teams is aware of the limitations of the norm data. I know even in my current situation where I'm working with other providers, like pediatricians and speech pathologists and occupational therapists, they have varying levels of kind of the impact of statistics on our test results and kind of the limitations that we're under with the difference, the different circumstances and how they impact norms. And so just being that source of information for others on the team as well, and emphasizing the caution that we need to take, I think is part of our role right now.
So to all my colleagues out there, have others had thoughts about this question of the validity of norms and how that's going to influence our results that they'd like to share?
So I was doing the wait to see if anyone else, but please someone else jump in if you can. I'll just, I mean, echo what Catherine said, but I think for me, I was telling this group when we were talking about this discussion that it's been good for me to just go back to the basics of multi-sources of data. You get, when you're doing assessment after assessment, you get kind of in this like routine, and you're just like, okay, here are my scores, here are my results, and you don't always like think through it. And now I'm really challenging myself to go back and look, does this data match what I know about this child pre-COVID? So does it match the reports that their school sent? Does it match what the parents had reported? Does it match all these other things? And I think in the school environment, hopefully, I mean, move-in students, it might be more difficult, but hopefully you have those permanent products and the records to go back and compare the results that you're getting. And then it's also challenging. You need to think about, I mean, if I'm testing a kid for autism, COVID's not going to all of a sudden make them look like they have autism. You know, I mean, there might be some social issues that come up because they haven't had connections with social situations, but there are some things that thinking about how are they going to be affected. So I think we have to consider the fact that the tests we're using were not normed in this situation, but that doesn't mean that the information we get is automatically unuseful. So I think it still could be useful data. And so I challenge you to really you have to put the pieces of the puzzle together. And I mean, I've even made spreadsheets where I've said, okay, for impulsivity, what pieces of data do I have that say that they were impulsive? Or for reading concerns, what pieces of data do I have that there are reading concerns? And just trying to mirror all of that. So like, as Catherine said, as school psychologists, we're good at that. And it's kind of going back to those problem solving skills and being smarter than the test that you're giving.
I just wanted to
Go ahead,
I was just going to acknowledge Lauren's comment. I see that in the chat box, and I really appreciate that. And that's kind of where I'm going with those sentence starters, is to kind of help provide some of the language there, because it's tricky to know how to put all of this stuff into writing in the reports, and it's just a lot of complexity. And it's similar to what we're used to, but it's also different. And so I agree that I think documentation is really, really important, especially important right now. And also the potential for needing additional data at a later time. I think it's okay to acknowledge that as well. I mean, we are under a lot of limitations, and so we can't expect ourselves to always have all the information we need to make high stakes decisions. I think it's okay I know we have limitations given things like child find and timelines and things like that. So sometimes we may need to make preliminary decisions within that team-based context, but at the end of the day, it's okay to say we need more data, and we need to be able to collect that when our circumstances are a little bit different.
And I appreciate both of those perspectives about coming back to the basics. And I think, you know, it would be a good time to brush off the cross battery books and thinking about what those types of assessments look like, as opposed to maybe some of the standardized ways we were doing evaluations, and just thinking about functional skills. Because at the end of the day, the purpose of the assessment isn't to get a score, it's to get some answers about what skills kids have and what skills need, so that we can intervene on those things that they need and capitalize on those skills that they already have. So I really like how Sarah said, bring it back to basics. So look at it from the frame of, yes, we're trying to make an eligibility decision, but eligibility is dependent on what their skills look like and how we can craft instruction and craft interventions around those. Did that spur any thoughts from anyone else? Oh, someone's saying in the box, Natalie saying, yep, taking a close look at archival performance data pre-COVID and making that a primary focus of doing a really good job of those record reviews, looking at permanent products, speaking to previous educators, parents. I think that's a great point, that's going to be important as we're building a case across time for some of these things. And yes, Lorraine, we are actually going to address that NASP statement in a future question. So good setup for me there. Moving forward, one of the things that I think is important, of course, is that we always find kind of the silver lining, or we think about what are some of the opportunities that have arisen because we've had to think about evaluation and how we do our jobs in a new way. And so Sarah mentioned that, you know, one positive was kind of that she's getting back to the basics of problem solving skills and going back to the root of who we are as school psychologists. So another question, our next question is, which tools or new ideas have we been using that will have long-term longevity? So what are some things that we're doing that are actually going to probably improve practice over time?
I'll go ahead and share one tool that was developed with my counselors that we started doing during this COVID time. Let me share my screen here. This is a counseling center check-in, that is what we called it, and we sent this out every week. It was just several questions, just 3 questions that we sent that we made here in a Google form. So it was very easy to make, and one thing I like is this is the responses part, and so I like that it actually gives you a graph, so you have that visual also to see how everybody's doing. So the questions we asked them were just, how are you feeling today? And their options were okay, positive and hopeful, sad and worried, and struggling, I need support. And so then, like I said, it automatically just graphs it there for you. What can we do to help you today was the next question. And that just let them write in their responses of things they could do. Nothing, make me worry less, etc. So just giving them some space to say if they needed anything in particular. And then if you are in need of support, how can we contact you? And so they all gave answers there as far as email, phone, etc. So I like this tool a lot. This is what it looks like on the first page of the actual questions. So tried to make it a little bit colorful. Those are the questions right there. And again, it was just a quick thing we did on Google Forms, so it didn't take a long time to do, but we started doing this every day, and I think it was nice for us to get several weeks of data during the time when everybody was sheltering in place. And then we actually talked about that we want to continue doing this for the rest of the year, whether we are virtual or in person, because it's still, all of our students are going to have Chromebooks this year. And so it still is going to be something that they can, stop sharing there, that they can, you know, fill that out there. And then if we do end up having to go virtual, our plan right now is to start in person. But if we do have to go virtual, then that's something they're already used to doing. It's kind of a format that we can continue along the way. So that's one tool that, that we really liked that we're going to continue using. Another thing is just the virtual meetings. That's another thing that we've talked a lot about, is that I think that we're all going to continue doing the virtual meetings, definitely right now, just as far as trying to get some more of that physical distancing as much as possible. But even after that, I think that we have found that it's a tool that was probably underutilized before. And so if you have parents that have a hard time getting away from work, getting to the school, you know, if we can do it in a meeting format, as we all learned, you know, with our crash course, we can still share our documents, we can share the reports, they can be seeing the same thing that we're looking at there. And then it takes out the driving time of parents having to actually drive physically to the school and not. So I think that that's one thing that's going to end up being really useful for us as we go along, and hopefully a good tool that we can use with parents. And an additional thing would be virtual PLCs. I think that's another thing that we've realized can be effective, and we can utilize that to our advantage as well. So those are just a couple of ideas that we had.
I really love that, Jackie, and I think that both of those points are really great, that some of the things that we sort of developed in a scramble to replace previous practices might actually replace the previous practice. So the idea of check-ins that are quick, but where you can get some data virtually and are very quick for students. I love that. And I agree that, you know, the virtual space is going to be so much more efficient in so many ways for people to begin thinking about how to have meetings, whether they're IEP meetings, staff meetings. This format for us has been beautiful. We've seen each other more this summer than we typically do in a year. So I take both of those points. Michelle, I saw that you put something in the chat box that I had also been wondering about and talking about. Can I call on you to maybe talk about your thoughts about observation and put you on the spot?
I don't know that I have any really great thoughts on it. It's just thinking about how can we utilize that moving forward. But it looks like Lauren has done some, so she might be a better resource for how she actually implemented that.
I was going to say I used the virtual observation with a very young student, and I think it gave a lot of really good functional information for a student who I had almost no other direct testing to refer to. So I thought it was a good use when there was no other information to be had.
I'll sort of piggyback on that, and I don't have the answers. I know this is something that my colleagues that work with the Osage County Co-op have been discussing for research purposes, because it would really help if they could record within the classroom some of the student behaviors and tracking on-task behaviors from a class-wide. I will say I don't know that they've come up with the answer because of challenges of they're trying to do it in different districts. So they are physically trying to do like over internet, and so like internet stabilization, and then we're transferring student observational data over the internet. So FERPA compliance and all of that. And I think what they've come up with is actually the best thing that they're doing is they just take an iPad to a classroom, set it up, and it records for whatever amount of time. Like the teacher has to press record and stop. Hopefully they don't forget so it doesn't drain the battery or drain the memory card. And then they go and pick it back up. And I could see that really working for us within a district. Like if you're within only a few buildings and it's easy for you to travel and kind of drop off that iPad and go pick that iPad back up, that might be something you could do. Just the physical challenges of like, where do you put it might be something. But I think that it's becoming more of a doable thing. There's still some challenges to getting it done. So I don't know if anyone else has any ideas or recommendations. I even suggested maybe like, you know, they have the game cameras to watch deer outside, that maybe that would work because like the high quality, but they said there's still the internet issues. Like I guess game cameras aren't FERPA compliant, so.
And Tiffany, you bring up an excellent point. I love how our minds are always balancing practice implications with our legal obligations. So thank you for that. It's important to think about, would students, would you need special permission to video a student? And so that might be something that you should be talking about with your special education directors and your school site groups and administrative teams surrounding special education, because it would seem like it's a potential that you might have to have that permission. And I know at least in some districts, as a parent, I sign an overall disclosure saying yes or no for my particular child or for class-wide events, and would that suffice or not? So I really like that. Has anyone at a district level thought about that or developed any guidance or had discussions surrounding that issue? No, we've got
Hey, Erica.
There's Jose. Yes, please.
Hey. So we have a district form for enrollment. So similar to what Erica said, it says, you know, we can record for classroom observations, we can record for field trips. It's the same form you use district-wide at the beginning of the school year. And so we just added a blurb on there that virtual observations may occur to obtain feedback from the student. We also are doing a FERPA form. If we're doing group therapy via virtual, Zoom or Google Hangout, that has on there guidance as to what we will be doing and what parents can and can't do, like record the sessions not allowed, and things like that. And so that's included in our beginning of the year school packet, and that's been beneficial for parents who know that since we're going virtual 100%, but it benefits parents to know that, hey, they're going to record my student virtually, or hey, that I may be seeing other students in therapy. So that form is just kind of a general recording form that we send out to all parents.
Thank you, Jose. And
Yeah.
I also want to just acknowledge your comment that it looks like your district will be providing the technology to staff members to be able to conduct those observations. And it looks like you have several platforms, Google Hangouts, Zoom, or these recorded sessions. And is this, those forms that you've already completed, is that something that you'd be willing to email to me or someone on the committee that we could maybe share out as resources?
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
I'll just briefly add, in the private practice setting, we also developed kind of a informed consent for in-person evaluations, given all of the different kind of differences in the policies and procedures, as well as the potential risk for exposure to COVID. And so I know there may be differences in how this kind of translates to the school setting, but if you're looking for some words, some wording to adapt for some kind of informed consent like that, that would be supplemental to the traditional informed consent, and we can share those as well.
Excellent. And it looks like we're getting some ideas and recommendations for other ways to do that, or ways that that has been done. So certainly, I think a better practice for getting valid observations where we're not, as the examiners, spoiling some of the results just by our presence. So does make it seem a little bit more naturalistic. Other ideas of things that you have already developed or you're thinking of coming forward that you think will actually replace or become better or best practice? Okay, spoiler, by the way, we'll be having another one of these meetings. We haven't scheduled it yet, but we're likely going to let school get rolling in whatever form that looks like for a little while, but we'll be interested to hear end of August, sometime in September, from the group about how some of these strategies are working and about other things that you have developed. So always be mindful that everyone in the group is interested to know what others are doing, and we'll have a call for those soon. Okay, so our next question, our fifth question is, has anyone developed any assessment or subtest protocols? So, you know, a scripted protocol for their alternative assessment procedures. And I think we're speaking specifically about the ADOS, which we've already mentioned that it's difficult with physical distancing or some of those things. And so I think Sarah and Catherine may have some ideas about this, but others as well, if there's, you know, certain alternative procedures that you've developed, at least your own within-person standardized protocol for.
Hey, in regards to the ADOS, there's a group that's developed the brief observation of symptoms of autism that kind of pulls from that in their progress monitoring. I believe they have the training online that you can do. It'll be a variation of the ADOS that you could use.
Yeah, and I think because I work for an institution, it's hard to get things easy. I haven't done it yet because you do have to get some more materials, but I think Catherine has done it. So do you want to kind of speak to your experience of doing it's called the BOSA, and we'll make sure you guys get the link to the training on that one.
Yeah, so I did the training, excuse me, it's required that you'd already be like a clinically trained ADOS trainer. So if you're already able to administer the ADOS and have been formally trained in that, then you're able to learn how to use the BOSA. It ranges from like 12 to 14 minutes, and you basically tell the parent how to engage in specific activities with the child. And it's broken up into like 2-minute or 4-minute activities, and there's particular toys they would use, and it's similar materials to the ADOS. Some of it overlaps, but like Sarah was saying, you have to purchase a few things. And the goal is to be able to observe for some of the same behaviors, but allow the parent to be with the child with neither of them wearing their masks. So you do either have to have access to like a mirror, two-way mirrored room, or get creative with how you're going to get the materials to the parent if you're going to do it virtually. But we've had some success with it. I mean, it's definitely different and a lot shorter than the ADOS, but it does give some opportunity to kind of add another piece of information to kind of what the other sources of data that you're collecting.
And I think I'm gonna say this as if I was the one that found it, but it's actually Catherine. So it sounds like there's actually so that's the developer of the ADOS is recommending to not do the ADOS, but to do the BOSA instead. But it sounds like some other researchers are saying, no, you can still do the ADOS. You're just going to have to use those caution statements when you're interpreting it and in what you're doing. And so that's what, because I don't have those other materials, that's what I've been doing in the clinic setting. And I almost could see that that would be more doable in the school because you're not always going to have the parent there. So if you wanted to do the BOSA, you do have to have the parent or someone that's comfortable being unmasked near their child to observe that. What I've been doing is really just changing out the material, so I'm only using the hard surface ones that are easy to clean. I'm doing more, I do usually have the parent in there, but not always. If it's an older child, I kind of set up in that same testing setting where like if I'm doing a module 3 or module 4, where I have the table in between us. And so I can still do all the kind of back and forth and the play and those pieces of it. The main thing I'm missing is I have my mask on and they have their mask. So I'm not necessarily seeing those like social shared interactions, but you can still tell a lot from someone's facial expressions, even when they're wearing a mask. So I really don't feel like there hasn't been anyone that I've done an ADOS, the modified ADOS with that I'm like, oh, there's no way I'm getting valid information here. But again, I'm not only using that and I'm not reporting scores from that. I am then also doing a CARS and I've also done an in-depth historical interview. So again, multiple sources of data.
Yeah, that's consistent with recommendations, both from the developer. I mean, I think there's acknowledgement that it has to be done differently depending on your circumstances, but I know that there are some researchers who are kind of deviating a little bit from the BOSA and deciding to go ahead with the ADOS, but using the clear masks. So if that's something that you could, I know it requires more funding, but if you could consider purchasing that, that's kind of what is being considered possibly more valid to be able to continue scoring, because researchers use that as an outcome measure. So anyways, just another consideration is the clear mask.
And speaking of that clear mask, Sarah, I think we were in conversations the other day, and can you just maybe give a heads up for, I think you were saying there are particular subtests, digit span maybe was one that you'd mentioned that you didn't initially think you would need the clear mask for, but that you've since adapted to use either the shield or the clear mask. So can you speak to just maybe some of those subtests that, and Catherine also, if you've experienced this, or some of those pieces of assessment? I mean, some of them I think are more obvious than others, and as far as, oh, this is one where I want the respondent to see my face, but can you just speak to some of those?
Yeah, so to be honest with you guys, it's still a lot of trial and error. So I'm not necessarily saying like I'm always your stands or some of those, but the ones with orally presented information where I feel like the mask may be that those are the ones that I
Sarah, I think we're losing you again, unfortunately. Catherine, did you have some insight into that?
Yeah, I mean, just considering which subtests are more likely to be impacted by mumbly voices that you may encounter when you're wearing a mask, you may consider wearing the shield and then removing the underneath mask if you're comfortable with that, or if you have access to the clear mask. I haven't actually used it yet, but we do have them on order. So maybe at the next meeting I can speak to how it goes with actually using them. But just different subtests have different considerations and may be more likely to be impacted.
And we have a question from Victoria, and I was curious about this too. If you have used, I think we've all maybe seen some pictures on social media, the plexiglass dividers that kind of divides an examiner and a student. Was it helpful, not helpful, necessary, unnecessary? Has anyone had experience with that to date?
Our district, this is Jackie Johns, our district did order 10 of them and they are going to be coming in this week. So I don't have experience yet, but much like Catherine just said, at the next meeting, I should have some experience with that as well. So.
And I think Jose had mentioned earlier that they have found they're using like an anti-fog cleaner on them, and then some other people have said like a dash of Dawn has helped with the fogging of those.
Yeah, we bought a gel that we use on the clear mask, and that helps a whole lot. But some people do the dish detergent or dish soap, and that works too. If you don't have any of those, your mask will fog real bad.
And I'll just say we're here to give some advice and to talk through these issues and to certainly share ideas. And we're not, the CDC or the health department. But one thing I have read is that the plexiglass dividers in themselves, while they look really cool, may not offer the same amount of protection as a face covering, because droplets are still able to move up and into air systems and down. And that's not my area of expertise, but I think I might caution that the plexiglass by themselves wouldn't be sufficient in most cases, but certainly better than nothing, particularly for kiddos where other types of face coverings and things won't be possible. On a side note, I just have to apologize. We have an additional attendee. A fly is like buzzing around my head. So that's why I keep like trying to catch it. Great. Okay. Other questions about specific protocols? We've had some information about the ADOS, about some of those more verbally loaded subtests or language loaded subtests. Other thoughts about that? And again, I know we'll revisit some of this, right? I think we're kind of thinking of this as our setup meeting, and then we will touch base again after everybody has maybe had some more experience, and I'll be very excited to hear more of you who've had some of these experiences in the school as we share out later. Okay, so the next couple I think have been top of mind for a lot of people, and so they're kind of heavy discussion items. And one was asked about in the chat, I think, in our last meeting. And the question is, given physical distancing requirements, how can schools ensure least restrictive environment? So in other words, as schools are many are trying to group kids by cohorts or by family groupings, or coming up with other ways to keep the same kiddos together throughout the day if they're planning in-person instruction. How can we ensure, general education teachers are sharing the loads of IEP team meetings? Our general education teacher, special education teachers potentially more at risk if they're floating. So some questions about that, and I'm going to pass this one on to Jackie.
And I am actually going to pass it on again to Kay Sandshaper, who wanted to share a little bit. Kay, do you want to introduce yourself and then you can address this a little bit?
Yes, can you hear me? Okay, I'm Kay Sandshaper, and I am retired after 38 years in Tulsa Public. I was a special ed teacher for 17 years, a school psychologist for, I guess, about 16, and then the remainder of my career I was the special ed director. I am now contracting with Collinsville, and I love it, but this has made me think a lot about all the different things I've done and how, when you group kids like that, one thing is LRE. I mean, are we predetermining that these two teachers are going to be the only teachers that have the special ed teachers, have the special ed kids? And if that's so, that's oppositional to the IDEA. Are we deciding based on, she's a good teacher, she can handle those kids, so she gets all of, if you've got, I looked at the percentages, this overall state percentage is about 16% kids with disabilities. So if you've got a class, a grade level of 100 kids, you've got 4 teachers with 25 kids in a class, which is, kind of a dream anymore, but you've got that. So they've got, of their 25 kids, 8 of them, if there's only 2 that have those kids, 8 of them are kids with disabilities. And the other teachers don't have those kids. Now, with disabilities also includes, I assume, kids with speech and language problems, which aren't really typically that much higher need. But it concerns me that too much burden is going to be placed on two teachers. And this is, all years are burdensome in their own ways, but this is going to be an especially burdensome and scary year. And if you've got 30% of your class are really hard kids, and you don't have support, which would be even a para in the classroom. I don't know if we're talking about kids that have resource and so they leave for a little while, or are we talking about kids that are doing push-in, special ed teachers are coming in. I'm not really sure how they're looking at that, but that concerns me, that we would do that and burden and put so much on so few teachers. So those teachers, so you've got 2 teachers that have to do all of the IEP meetings. They have to sit in all those meetings. They have to do all the accommodations and modifications and, all the things that have to be done. And let's face it, a lot of general ed teachers aren't really thrilled with having to do that in the first place. I mean, that's been my experience anyway. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Crickets?
Hi, I'm Shelley McGowan. The question came from me, and it was based on kind of some pre-planning we were doing. And I think the idea behind it was to try to minimize the exposure of teachers and students and cross exposure and things like that. But my concern was exactly what you voiced in terms of disproportionate representation in 2 classes, and just knowing the needs of different and various students, and then all of the unknowns, that it might be just undoable. And so, I think the question was trying to protect health, but at the same time, it's like you said, the whole point is to make sure that we're meeting the tenets of IDEA. And so I don't know how we can not just kind of do what we typically do. Would that be your take on that?
It is. It's my take on it. I just think that if you spread those kids out through all 4 teachers and those classes stay together as a cohort, I don't know that kids with disabilities are at any higher risk of being someone who would transmit COVID. So to me, it makes sense to kind of stay the course that we've been doing forever. Yeah.
Are there others, again, and I'm calling on maybe some of our district level folks who started engaging in some of this conversation as far as the grouping of kiddos and trying to meet all of our different mandates and balance those with CDC recommendations? Is there anyone who's done some of this work that can speak?
Hey there, it's me.
Okay, thanks, Jose.
So,
take it.
So I will say, again, we're 100% virtual starting in the fall, and so we are doing group therapy. We're doing group lessons with small groups of students. Again, we have a FERPA waiver that parents signed. But then we're also ensuring that gen ed teachers are actually collaborating with special education. And so I have made a point this summer to meet with every single teacher in my district to tell them the importance of collaboration. And so I have set up Google Hangouts for each of my team members in the SPED department to then schedule collaboration time at least twice a week with gen ed teachers to meet the needs of those students. And so we're sharing lesson plans, we are sharing lesson objectives, we are sharing everything that we can so that we're not doing double the work. I'm also allowing gen ed teachers to kind of lead as far as the lessons go, especially at the high school level, and what they are teaching. And then the special ed teacher comes in and reinforces those ideas and those topics. And so that's been very beneficial. In a way, it's made things easier for them because they're not alone. As we know, education is a lonely world if you want it to be. So we created a way to have virtual meetings since we all were 100% virtual in the fall. That ensures LRE for our students based on what we do have right now. So LRE looks a little bit different with COVID. It looks a little bit different when it's 100% virtual. So we make sure that what we're doing is it's FAPE, it's LRE, it's everything that we need to be that's legally compliant. And so we are making sure that those needs are met. I will tell you that the State Department is releasing a contingency plan through EPLAN. And so that allows you, again, to document how the service will be provided, whether it's a home, virtual, hybrid models, and that kind of gives you more protection. And that's being released, I think, July 31st.
Okay, that's a good idea. And then we've had some folks that have let me know that they're just ensuring that in their, it sounds like they're using kind of a Google Classroom format, and they're just assigning students receiving special education services in with the general education students. So they're still assigned a general education teacher, a part of that classroom, participating in those assignments or activities that looks like. And then separately, the special education teacher has a group to provide that extra support. And so just kind of trying to mimic potentially what it would look like in previous years where they're on a roll and part of a class and still engaged in with typical peers and development, but then also the special education teachers have that separate. So I think for virtually, there's a lot of different options like that would make it a little bit easier. And then I think the hard part that I think many of us have questions about is if they're delivering in-person instruction, what that looks like in terms of, again, our teachers traveling, our students getting exposure to typical peers and some of those things. So it sounds like, you know, it might be one of those things we dive in and let's see if we can get some answers through experience. But again, certainly if you and your teams come up with some great ideas or you find things that are certainly working or certainly not working, let us know. So I don't know that we've answered the question as sufficiently as we would all like, but I think it's just important that we all have it in mind as we're thinking about creating our services. And I think just knowing that it is a question and a consideration is a great first step towards addressing it moving forward. Sarah, our team, did we have anything else on this one?
No, I do. Trisha did put the CDC guidelines in there, which again, I mean, no one's yet telling us exactly what to do, but that is something that as if you're involved in these conversations at a district level, I think it's important to have those access to those so that you can refer back to what's being recommended as far as the physical safety precautions.
Okay. So we'll keep tuned on that one. And I think that's something we'll keep our eye out for in terms of how we're creating good practice. The next two questions, again, are kind of top of mind questions for us. And the first one is, how long should we wait before conducting initial evaluations? And at what point should we be picking up our lingering evaluations? So I know many of you abruptly had a change in March, and you probably have some that you met with the team and discussed, we'll be revisiting this in the fall, and we blinked an eye and the fall's here. And then of course, we still have child find obligations, and we're going to have potentially even more parents or teachers who are concerned about students. So what does that guidance look like? So I think Jackie had some thoughts, and then I'm going to open it up to the floor.
And I'm not sure how helpful my thoughts are, because my first thing that I'm going to say is just that it depends. And I know that people are tired of hearing that, but unfortunately, that's the truth right now, is that there isn't. I know we all wish we had that answer of exactly, you know, how many weeks. Give me an exact time frame of when we should be looking at that. I know I've had a lot of questions about that. And I think kind of referencing back to some of the things that we talked about are, again, I think now it's always important, but now even more than usual is to really make sure that we're looking at that history, looking at the previous concerns, kind of like Natalie had mentioned earlier in the chat box, making sure we're looking at that previous performa data, look at how their performance is now, and see, you know, really see if there is a difference, kind of compare those. Really, I think as far as we need to really prioritize by the level of concern, the ones that we had consent for last year, and, you know, abruptly, like Erica said, we abruptly had to stop. And so hopefully we have some good data back then from when they were in typical school. Hopefully we should have some good ideas of what the concern is. And we don't want to ignore that. Again, looking at our child find obligations, you know, we want to be considerate of that. And so really using that, I'm going to try to get data from previous teachers as much as possible, especially here early in the school year. Reach out to those teachers they had last year, make sure that if I didn't already have data from them, that I do have some data to compare to when I'm working with trying to see how they're doing currently. And again, just, you know, going back to the basics, making sure that we are using multiple sources of data. We all know there's going to be limitations right now with any of these standardized measures. And so really trying to utilize as many different sources of data as we can, talk to multiple different people, get a really good history, and kind of go from there. Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on that?
We have had a comment from one district, and it hasn't been announced yet, but somebody's been working on a team, and it sounds like there's at least one where the directive will be for psychs to come in kind of during in-service days and scheduling testing at central office. I don't know for sure, but it seems like potentially it looks like a distance learning, a district that might be starting with a distance learning platform. But they're going to be scheduling ways for students to come in and physically complete evaluations, I'm assuming with a lot of the safety and adaptations that we've been talking about. So that might be one way, is scheduling, even in a distance learning environment, scheduling in times to be physically completing assessments. I hope I captured that correctly. That person can send me a chat if I didn't capture that in the right way. Another thing I would be thinking about is similar to the advice that we've been giving throughout, is that I think it all just comes down to documentation and conversations with the team. So if you had some lingering ones, to me it would make sense to have a meeting, whether that's in person or virtually, and just convene the team and say, what has changed? What concerns do we still have? Services that were available when we were all in schools, of course, are going to look different. So as a parent, I would want to know, well, what would these services look like now if they were being offered? And would that change the team's decision about whether or not to pursue special education eligibility? You know, it looks different than it would. So I would say, whatever you're deciding, be thinking about just convening with the team, having all of those pieces and all of those people in place, and having the discussions, and of course documenting what it is that you decide moving forward. But things have changed and things will continue to change. And so I think rather than having a blanket statement of, oh, we'll complete all of them by this day, or we won't start initials unless, flies in the face of kind of having individualized assessments. So there's a team of people around each of those students that can sit down and help to make some of those hard decisions. Oh, good. And Blake, yeah, thanks. Blake's asking, does anyone have additional rules when assessing students that are coming from out of the country? Sometimes I'm the first one to have to give a placement test for someone. Does anyone else have that issue or some advice?
Yes, Blake, I will make sure that you have to rule out limited English proficiency. I have a flow chart that kind of walks me through like looking at the WIDA, how long have they been in the U.S., what is their BICS and CALP score, and then also looking at Colorín Colorado, which is a website that kind of tells you, being a first generation student in the U.S., how do they, how they progress in education and language, and it kind of helps you rule out LEP, and then also gives you recommendations for doing the test in their native language as required by federal law. So I can also send that to Erica so that you have access to that as well.
At this point, I know I don't mean to be rushing anybody's very important questions or any of the conversations, but we do only have 15 minutes left scheduled. So what I would encourage everybody to do is, if there's questions in the box that you feel like you could speak to, please chat with that person privately or share your ideas in the box, because we will gather those and give some guidance towards that. So I may not address the questions in the box until we've gotten to two important ones that I think people wanted to hear from. And one is about lack of instruction, and that is a rule out. And then some behavior progress, behavior charting, and what that looks like. So with your permission, let's discuss those two questions that were submitted ahead of time, and maybe get at least a little bit of discussion around those. And then feel free though to just be interacting as much as you want to in the chat box to provide questions and answers to each other. So kind of following up with the questions about when to start initial evaluations or finishing up some that may have been open, and thinking about lack of instruction. That's something that's always been a little bit difficult to rule in or rule out. And we have these dual tasks of how do we balance child find. We also know that in the case law, you can't use RTI as a deterrent to eligibility. We all know about the guidance surrounding that, but with each of the disability categories, and particularly those like SLD, we do have to rule out a lack of appropriate instruction. So a couple of things that I'm going to share, and the first one is a white paper that NASP produced and sent out, and it does speak to the impact on special education evaluations and SLD identification. So I think that's been linked in the box. If you hadn't read that, I would encourage you very much to read it. And one of the suggestions, a few of the suggestions that I liked, is that we always kind of put lack of instruction at the end when we're asking our eligibility questions. We ask, does a student have a disability? If yes, is it negatively impacting them? Is yes. If yes, do they need special education? If yes, well, was there a lack of instruction? And the paper really suggests moving that lack of instruction question to the forefront, even before some of those other questions, which is a little bit out of order, I think, than we sometimes conceptualize. But I like that idea because it helps us give some ideas for how to intervene first and how to think about it from have they gotten what they need before we're thinking of eligibility. And then a good portion of the paper just talks about, in order to rule out lack of instruction, we have to have some evidence that there was instruction. So putting back into place good core instructional practices is going to be key. And I think someone asked earlier in the chat box, the recommendation is really to start some skill-based groups and to engage in some recovery, some skill recovery efforts before we even do our screenings. And so a lot of times we might wait 2 weeks, get some procedures down, and then do our universal screenings. And I think this paper would suggest that doing a screening at the beginning is likely just going to tell you that everybody's behind, and as much as half a year behind. And students who were already struggling might be further than that because we're dealing with pandemic issues, typical summer recovery issues on top of students who potentially do have and need some more support. And so it's been some time speaking about helping your teachers know what that means, that your 4th grade teachers are very likely going to be teaching 3rd grade foundational skills, and that core instruction may not look like the hour and 20 minutes segmented into direct and teacher instruction and then small groups, that it might really need to be more small group oriented, basic skill, what we might think of as typical tier 2 first to reestablish skills. And that's also not just a way to reestablish skills, but to ensure that students are receiving core instruction. And then if after 4 to 6 to 9 weeks of that type of format doesn't work, then we know that we can rule in or rule out some lack of instruction when we're looking at our eligibility questions. Also just some suggestions about using, of course, RTI over any type of discrepancy model. So I think we've advocated for trying to leverage that model in districts that haven't made that turn yet, and that, looking at growth rates and once again, looking at what was progress before COVID compared to progress after COVID. Everybody's probably going to have that initial drop in their basic skills, but take in mind that, we need to reestablish a new growth rate and see if we can get back on track in terms of those ROIs. And so that's, I think, the big pieces of that. And then the other kind of related piece from NASP that I wanted to share out, and I think I'll try to share my screen for this one, is a new tool called the CSARM, which is the School Adjustment Risk Matrix. And this wasn't necessarily designed for academic skills, but I think it kind of gives a good graphic or a good idea for something that could potentially be used in addition to your academic screeners and other work. And it just talks about, it takes from the crisis literature and it talks about triaging kits. So don't think of it as the same thing as a screener, but think of it as a triage for who might off the bat do we think we might need to provide more or less intervention to. And this could be academic intervention, behavior intervention, social emotional intervention. And so what this matrix does is it says, hey, take a look. We know a strong predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So it defines for you, who had positive experiences in school and at home before COVID, whose experiences were variable, whose experiences were negative. Take that and now let's see what happened during COVID or during the first few weeks of starting back in our instructional practices. And has it been positive, has it been variable, or has it been negative? Because as we've discussed in previous meetings, for some students, this has been great. They've been able to work at their own pace. They've grown closer to their families. It hasn't been extremely negative for every single student. And along those two dimensions, then you can fairly quickly triage or quickly sort who might need what level of intervention, kind of following our multi-tiered model. So again, I wouldn't advocate for this to replace some of your universal screenings, but this might be something to consider when you're thinking about, I don't want to wait 4 weeks before maybe implementing some tier 2 types of things or some tier 3 types of things for students who may need it. So we'll link that paper too, and then it just talks about, of course, how that matrix can help do a quick sort into some different tiered levels of support. So that's just one other resource that I had to speak to that. So again, I don't know that that answers all of the questions about lack of instruction, but it just comes down to using problem solving and establishing good core instruction in the first place to help guide those decisions. And did anyone have some quick thoughts on that to add?
I know we're running short on time, but I just wanted to add, I think there was a question that you addressed there about the 4 weeks from NASP. My understanding is they haven't provided like a hard and fast rule that everyone has to wait 4 weeks. That is just a general guidance of, we need to, like Erica was saying, let's use our data. Let's use what we know about the, and let's make some reasonable decisions. Really, again, going back to the problem solving model of looking at what our students need. So I just wanted to make sure it's clear though that NASP hasn't said you have to wait 4 weeks.
Thank you, Sarah. Yes, and it is, Thank you for that. And it is considered a guidance document. So it's just providing recommendations from Amanda Vanderhayden and the Burnses. I mean, there's some other folks who provided that guidance, but it is not a hard and fast, NASP wouldn't put out a hard and fast rule to that extent. Of course, our State Department or districts could, but it's just a guidance document. For the sake of time, and because I think we have some other guests, and again, keep the comments and discussion going in the chat. But one of our final questions was, we had some questions about, can someone please share their behavior progress monitoring tools, and what are some concrete tools we've been using for behavior monitoring? And so Jackie, I'm going to pass this to you, I think, again, to introduce your guests.
Yes, thank you, Erica. So we have two of our awesome teachers here that are on with us today, two of our special education teachers. Taylor Wheeler is a middle school special education teacher, and Emily Riffle is an elementary special education teacher. So I wanted to have both of them on here so that they have different levels that they work with, and just share some of the tools that we kind of worked on again, when COVID started, kind of coming up with some ideas that they could get some behavior monitoring in other settings, because we can't do it if we're not all together in person. So how could they enlist the help of parents and things like that? So both of them were nice enough to share their time with us today. So I'm going to let them, I think they have their tools ready to also just kind of share so you can see what those look like. Taylor, Emily, which one of you wants to go first?
I'll go first, unless Emily really wants to go first. Hi, I'm Taylor Wheeler. I am a special ed teacher at Collinsville Middle School. I've been a teacher there for 10 years. And so when this all started, Jackie was great, because she was like, what are we going to do with behavior monitoring? And I was like, I don't know. And so we kind of brainstormed about how we can get parents involved, because how can you monitor behavior if you can't see the behavior? So we did some things with Google Forms. And so I'm going to show you that right now. And I blocked out all the names and everything. So can you guys all see that? Awesome. Okay, so this is just a simple Google form, and it's based on this kiddo's goals. This is a kiddo with autism. They just had to put in the date. Was student able to control his emotions while completing his schoolwork? Was the student able to ask for a break, which are the two things that we're really working on with him. And so then there was a place for comments down here. And I sent this to the parent, and she needed reminders to get it done, which, I mean, it's part of it. So, but it gives you this nice percentage, just like Jackie showed on the counseling part. As you can see that 50% of the time he was able to control his emotions. And yes, he was able to ask for a break if he needed one. So, I mean, that's good. We taught him the skills we were working on, and he was continuing them during, school closure. And it's nice because you can see the days that they filled it out and all that. I kind of like the Google Forms version. And then here's another one that I did. This kid has got autism too, and he has like really negative feelings about himself. And so we really wanted to promote that positive self-talk. And again, you just, a couple little goal questions and place for comments for the parents to plug in. And you get these pretty little graphs to see, what's going on. And so what I'm going to do, or what I think I'm going to do starting the year, is I'm going to make something like this on a Google Doc and try to get it to parents when we start the year, in case we do go distance learning, or in case, all of a sudden we shut down again. And so this is just an easy thing for them to say, check yes or no. Did they require less than 2 reminders to stay on task? And did they politely ask for help? And so down here at the bottom, I have like total number of yeses, nos, and sometimes, and so you can, there's 1, 2, 3 days on there. And it's easy to just see and really quickly do for the parents. You don't want to put too much on them, obviously, but you want to get good data also. So I think I'm going to make especially for my high needs behavior kids, I'm going to make maybe a folder with Brad's and put a bunch of these in there and send them home at the beginning of the year. And hopefully that will alleviate a little bit of that behavior monitoring issue that we had, in April, when we were all like, we don't know what to do. So that's what I've done. Thanks for letting me share, Jackie.
Yes, thank you so much, Taylor. I appreciate you sharing. And Emily, I'm going to bring yours up for you, because I know you said you were going to be on your phone. So there you go.
Thank you. I'm Emily Riffle. I'm taught at Collinsville for almost 20 years. And I did too. Neither one of mine were autism. They were both more oppositional defiant students. So my first one, his major goal was just to see that he completed his assignments. That was without outbursts. so I was able to send this home to his mom. She was not great at filling it out, but she was very good at getting a hold of me. So I kind of knew what he was doing either way. But it has a comment section at the bottom, and it's just a mark yes or no, which I thought would be easiest for her to fill out. On my second one, is it scroll below? Yes. Okay, so we wanted to do one that was like never, sometimes, always. So I chose another student, and his main goal is just that he is able to handle his anger without physically hurting someone, including, his siblings or whatever. So I just did hers for a week. Unfortunately, at the very end of all of this, they left the state and went on vacation. So even though I sent this to them, I got pretty much no response from her because they were on vacation. I did get to see the Texas Zoo though. But I like this one. I was actually looking at them last night, and I thought that they would be very good to do something on forms, because I would like the graphing material. I think it's very nice to have, but these are just basics so that you can get started at the beginning of the year.
Awesome. Thank you, Emily. And I just want to point out here too, that in the comments section, she gave them some ideas as far as situational factors. Did the student need adult assistance to regulate, or did they regulate independently? Again, just to get us some more information, if the parent does go ahead and fill that out. So we at least have the, the yes, no, or the never, sometimes, often, always. But then if we can, getting some more of that situational data so that we know how we need to adjust our goals, because of course the reason we're doing all of this isn't just to have the numbers and not look at them, but then to look at it and see, is what we're doing working? Do we need to change and try something different? So I love those ideas. Thank you both so much for sharing. And I think it's good to see from each other. Like I said, Emily and Taylor are in different buildings, so they don't work together on a regular basis, but just by looking at those, realizing, okay, maybe I want to try one of the Google Forms instead. But again, just using whatever works for you, collaborating with your team, and working together, because we're all figuring it out. So thank you both for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Okay, I did put in the chat, and we're up against our time, unfortunately, but we want to be respectful for those of you that need to hop off for another commitment. Feel free, and we will have the recording and all of the information and resources talked about and provided in the chat. Those will be sent to you. But I know that at least myself and a couple of the other moderators can stay on for a few more minutes. And so if you'd like to stay, we can extend till about 11:45 just to wrap up any lingering questions or discussion. And I want to lead that off by saying we're so thankful to have teachers, and I love the cross collaboration. I think that's another opportunity from crisis, is that we've learned we don't have to stay in our silos, and it's really good for us to reach out to professionals across the state and across our districts, and sometimes it's even just across the street, to see what others are doing. And I loved those forms. School Psychs, did you have questions for those teachers about the forms, or parts that you wanted to see or ask about implementation, or anything that they can help with since they developed those? Okay, so hearing none from that, was there any lingering questions or comments or thoughts? We have a couple of tasks left. We do have just some quick polls. If you're able to stay on for just a moment and complete those, that will help guide our committee work in the future. This is our last summer session that we had planned, but the committee is still in place to support school psychs across the state during this pandemic, and certainly starting in a new year like we've never experienced. So if you have the ability to complete those quick polls, we would like that. And then Tricia would be upset with me if after we do those polls, we didn't take a picture of everybody rocking today. And so you don't have to be rocked out. We just want to see your face. So if everybody can after you complete the poll, turn on your camera for just a brief moment so we can take a picture. That would be fantastic.
Yeah, and I did just launch that poll, so you can go ahead and complete that so we can get that information. And then please look for your email. By the end of the week, everyone who registered for this session will get an email from our OSPA communications email address with all of the links and resources and a link to this recorded session that you are more than welcome to share with your colleagues or whoever else. We'll also be posting all that information on our website. If you don't get that email by, I'm going to give myself till Monday of next week, then let us know. And that means probably somehow it got lost in the internet system. And so we can resend that. And any communications with us, send to ospacommunications@gmail.com. And I will, if someone, Trisha, if you have the box, the chat open, to put that email address just to make sure. And we are getting some of those votes. I appreciate that. It's looked like people are saying yes, continue these like once a month during the semester, which is, I mean, I think a good resource for what, you know, again, we're all going into the unknown here together. So I think being able to continue collaboration would be an excellent thing to help us at least through the fall.
Sorry, as we're getting those final poll results, is there anything else that is lingering? Okay, then I'm going to let Trisha take it over for a picture, and then we'll close out. And just on behalf of this committee and all of OSPA, we know that you guys truly are rock stars. We say it jokingly, but not lightly, knowing the complication that we all face starting back to school and just navigating these waters. And we just want to know we appreciate you, we see you, and we hear you and the work that you're doing, and we appreciate it so much. Please reach out to us for support at any time, and best of luck to all of you. In the fall, we're excited to hear about the great things that you'll be doing for our schools and our kids and our community. So thank you so much. Get ready for the picture.
Okay, I'm going to give you guys a few seconds for people to jump off if they don't want to turn their video on, or if you don't have your video on and you're trying to do that. I'll give you a few minutes.
Sarah, we do have a request if it's ready to quickly share the results of the survey too. So we might take a picture, and then if you'll pull up the survey results for those that want to see it.
Okay. Is everyone on that wants to be on for that picture? We've got quite a few names, and sometimes that, and no picture. I just want to make sure. One more minute. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and take that picture. On the count of 3, I'll take 2 of them, okay? 1, 2, 3. I got one, and I'm gonna do the second one, okay? Big smiles, okay, 1, 2, 3. Awesome, thank you guys for participating. And we will share the results of those polls right now. I'm gonna let Sarah or Erica, are you going to speak to those?
I don't have the results, and I'm worried that maybe.
And Sarah just got kicked off again, she said. So
She got kicked off again. So we will share those out with the other resources when we send the recording and the resources from today. We'll share those poll results. So I think now it's an appropriate time to close. So I wish you all a great day today, a great start to the new year, and just know we appreciate you so much. So bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye, everyone.